The morning was quiet and sunny when the girl decided to go to the doctor's clinic. She had been feeling a little anxious over the past few days, but nothing serious, just the kind of worry that builds up when you have an appointment you are not entirely sure about. Her mother had reminded her several times to eat something before leaving, to be calm, and to take her documents and insurance card. But the girl felt her stomach twisting with nerves anyway. She walked down the familiar streets. Noticing the small shops opening one by one, the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, and the sound of birds chirping, it was a normal day on the surface, but inside her mind, she was going over every possible scenario, imagining everything from routine advice from the doctor to something serious that might change her day completely. When she reached the clinic, the waiting room looked just like it always did, with pale walls, a few old magazines stacked neatly on the table, and a large poster reminding patients to wash their hands. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile, which made her feel slightly more at ease. "Good morning, how are you today?" the receptionist asked, handing her a clipboard with some forms to fill out. She nodded and smiled back, trying to hide the nervousness that made her hands shake a little. As she wrote her name, date of birth, and other details, she noticed a little boy sitting in the corner with his mother, playing with a small toy car, and she tried to focus on something normal and ordinary, something that would keep her mind from wandering into anxious thoughts. After a few minutes, the nurse called her name, and she followed her down the narrow hallway, the sound of her shoes echoing slightly on the clean floor. She could hear soft voices from other rooms, laughter from a child, the beep of a machine somewhere in the clinic, and it all made her feel that life was moving normally, even if her own life felt paused for a moment. The nurse guided her into a small room with a comfortable chair and a small table, and asked her routine questions about her health. Her heart beat a little faster with each question, but she answered honestly, knowing this was part of the process that everyone goes through. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that it was just a checkup, just a normal visit, nothing more, nothing less. The doctor arrived a few minutes later, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a calm voice. His presence immediately made the room feel more professional, but also safe. He greeted her politely, asking her how she was feeling and what had brought her to the clinic today. She explained her symptoms carefully, trying not to sound overly worried, and he nodded, listening attentively, taking notes on his tablet. He asked a few more questions about her lifestyle, diet, and habits, making small, friendly jokes along the way to lighten the mood. This helped her relax slightly, making her forget, even if only for a moment, that her visit could reveal something unexpected. The doctor then suggested performing an ultrasound as part of the checkup, explaining it was routine and completely painless. She nodded, feeling a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. She had never had one before, so part of her was excited to see what it would show. Another part of her wondered if everything would be normal, hoping that this simple procedure would just confirm that she was fine. She changed into the hospital gown, feeling a little awkward, but the nurse was kind and patient, explaining everything step by step, and soon, she was ready for the procedure. Laying on the examination table, the cold gel applied to her skin making her shiver slightly. She looked at the ceiling, trying to distract herself with thoughts of school, friends, and weekend plans, anything to keep her mind from racing too much. As the doctor adjusted the machine and began the ultrasound, the room was filled with a quiet hum, broken only by the gentle instructions from the doctor and the soft beeping of the machine. At first, everything seemed ordinary, normal, and she felt relief wash over her as she saw the screen showing images of her body. Everything looked peaceful, almost like a hidden world she had never seen before. She tried to relax, thinking about how simple this visit had seemed at the start, how she had walked in nervous and unsure, and now, laying there, it felt almost calming, almost like she could breathe again. Little did she know, the ordinary morning, the familiar streets, the sunny day, and the quiet clinic were all about to change, and what she thought would be just another routine visit was about to become a story she would never forget. This was a moment of calm before the storm, the last part of her ordinary life before an event she could never have imagined would turn everything upside down. After a few minutes of waiting, the doctor returned to the room, carrying his tablet and wearing the same calm expression that had made the girl feel slightly safer earlier. He greeted her again, this time with a reassuring smile, and asked her to sit up on the examination table. She did as instructed, fidgeting slightly with the edge of the gown, feeling the nervous energy in her chest. She tried to take a deep breath, reminding herself that it was just a checkup, just another ordinary medical Visit. The doctor began with the routine questions, asking her about her health, if she had any pain, discomfort, or unusual symptoms. He wrote down everything carefully, his eyes occasionally meeting hers in a way that was professional but kind, making her feel that she was being truly listened to, not just rushed through a process. She explained her symptoms clearly, trying not to exaggerate but also not to minimize anything. Every word felt heavy in the room, as if speaking them aloud made them real, and she realized how much she depended on this moment, this professional guidance, to make sense of her own body. Next came the physical examination. The doctor asked her to lie back slightly while he checked her vitals, measuring her blood pressure, listening to her heartbeat, and observing her reactions. Each step felt like a small ritual of trust, and she tried to focus on the methodical way he worked, on the sounds of the stethoscope, the soft beep of the blood pressure monitor, and the faint hum of the room's air conditioner. Anything ordinary to distract her from the tiny flickers of fear that kept rising in her chest. When it was time to do the ultrasound, the doctor explained carefully what would happen, how the machine would work, and what she might see on the screen. He emphasized that it was routine, that it would not hurt, and that he was just checking for normal conditions. She nodded, her curiosity mingled with a lingering worry. She had watched videos online about ultrasounds before, but seeing the machine in real life, with the cold gel and the moving probe, felt entirely different. The nurse helped her get into position, gently adjusting the pillow under her head and smoothing her gown, making her feel a little more at ease. The small human gestures were comforting, reminding her that this was not a frightening place, but a space where people cared about her well-being. As the ultrasound probe touched her skin, she felt a strange sensation, cold and slippery, but not painful. The doctor's hands moved carefully, slowly, almost like he was guiding her through an invisible map of her own body. He narrated lightly, pointing out organs and explaining their functions in simple words. The girl listened, fascinated by the images appearing on the screen, some shapes and shadows she barely recognized, but she found herself marveling at the complexity and mystery of her own body. It was both beautiful and a little unsettling, seeing parts of herself she had never noticed before. For a while, everything seemed normal, ordinary, almost peaceful. The girl relaxed slightly, thinking that this routine visit would end just as it had begun, with a polite conversation, a few routine checks, and a clear report that everything was fine. She even smiled faintly at a small shadow on the screen that the doctor pointed out, joking gently about how she looked like a tiny alien inside. That little joke made her laugh nervously, and for a moment, the fear that had been building since the morning melted away, replaced by curiosity and wonder. But as the doctor moved the probe to another area, his expression began to change subtly. She noticed it immediately, though she didn't fully understand why. His eyebrows knitted slightly, and his lips pressed together for a moment. He paused, studying the screen more closely, adjusting the machine settings, zooming in, and moving the probe slowly, deliberately. The atmosphere in the room shifted imperceptibly, and the girl felt it, a sudden tension that made her stomach drop. Something was different now. Something had changed in what had been an ordinary, calm examination. The doctor finally looked at her, his eyes serious, a tone of gravity creeping into his voice. "I see something we need to talk about," he said softly, though firmly. Her heart skipped a beat, the simple words carrying a weight that she could feel deep in her chest. She tried to keep her breathing steady, unsure whether to ask questions or wait. The routine examination that had started with curiosity and mild anxiety was now transforming into a moment that would change everything she thought she knew about her visit, about her body, and about the day ahead. As the doctor's eyes stayed fixed on the ultrasound screen, a silence filled the room, thick and heavy. She noticed it immediately, the way his calm demeanor had shifted, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the slight furrow of his brow. Something was different now, something serious, though she didn't know what it was yet. She lay there, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of the shadows and shapes that had seemed almost ordinary just moments before, her curiosity mixed with a nervous flutter in her chest, every heartbeat echoing louder than usual. The doctor leaned closer to the machine, adjusting the probe with careful precision, his fingers moving almost like they were tracing a hidden map. He whispered something to the nurse, who nodded quietly and glanced at the girl with a look that made her uneasy. It was not fear exactly, but a signal that something unusual had been found, something that required attention, something that she couldn't yet understand. For a moment, she thought it might be a mistake, or perhaps an anomaly that didn't matter, but the doctor's focused expression told her otherwise, his lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes scanning the screen repeatedly, occasionally moving his gaze to her, as if searching for a reaction. She tried to smile, to mask the growing panic in her stomach, but the smile felt weak, forced, and she realized she was holding her breath without noticing. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "There's something on the ultrasound that we need to discuss immediately." The words hit her like a cold wave, and she could feel the room narrowing around her. Her mind raced, trying to guess what it could be, every scenario, from minor to serious, flashing across her thoughts in rapid succession. Her hands gripped the edge of the examination table, nails digging into the fabric of her gown, as if holding on to something tangible could keep her grounded. The doctor pointed at the screen, showing her the shapes that she could barely comprehend. His tone remained professional, but a subtle urgency seeped through every word. "This is not typical, and it requires immediate attention." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. She nodded slowly, though inside, her mind was spinning, wondering what had gone wrong, if she had done something wrong, or if this was just a fluke. The ordinary visit had vanished, replaced by a tense moment that would be remembered forever. The nurse remained calm, standing by the side, ready to assist, but even her calmness could not erase the unease that filled the room. The girl noticed the way both adults exchanged quick, quiet glances, the kind of look people share when they need to make a difficult decision quickly, something beyond the usual routine, something that could change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. "Is it serious?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling, afraid of her own question, afraid of the answer. The doctor sighed softly, taking a moment before responding, choosing his words carefully. "It's unusual, and it's important that the right authorities are informed," he said slowly, carefully, as if weighing each word. Her stomach sank further, and the room seemed to tilt slightly around her. The ordinary, mundane day she had started with now felt like it belonged to someone else, someone whose life was predictable and calm, not hers. She tried to focus on the doctor's next steps, watching him navigate the situation with professionalism and care, noticing the way he maintained a steady voice despite the tension. He seemed to know exactly what to do, though she could not yet understand the severity of it. She realized that something she had never expected, something she had never even imagined, was unfolding right in front of her. In the small, bright room of a clinic, the quiet hum of the ultrasound machine now felt almost sinister, a soundtrack to a revelation that would change everything. For the first time, the girl felt a mix of fear, confusion, and curiosity all at once. She wanted answers, yet part of her feared the truth. The ultrasound, which she had expected to be routine and harmless, had turned into a window into a reality she wasn't ready to face. The ordinary morning, the calm clinic, the routine visit, all of it was gone, replaced by a moment she would never forget. A revelation that would mark the start of an unforgettable, life-changing story. The words of the doctor still hung in the air, heavy and almost suffocating. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as if it had taken on a life of its own. Each beat echoed loudly in the small examination room, drowning out the hum of the machines and the quiet shuffling of papers on the counter. She tried to focus on the doctor's face, searching for reassurance, but all she saw was seriousness. A gravity she had never noticed in him before, the calm, ordinary doctor she had known for a few minutes now seemed like a stranger, someone carrying news she wasn't prepared to hear. Her mind raced, jumping from one thought to another, trying desperately to make sense of what had just been revealed on the ultrasound. The images on the screen blurred in her memory, shadows and shapes that seemed normal a moment ago now felt mysterious, threatening, and impossible to understand. She wanted to ask questions, to speak, but her throat felt tight, as though the words had been trapped inside, refusing to escape. She blinked rapidly, hoping that when she opened her eyes, the fear would vanish, but it didn't. Instead, it grew, filling the room like a silent storm. "Can you explain what it is?" she finally whispered, her voice trembling, almost swallowed by the tension around her. The doctor took a deep breath, pausing, as if searching for the right words that could convey the situation without causing unnecessary panic. His gaze shifted briefly to the nurse, who nodded slightly, confirming the seriousness of the matter. "It's something that cannot wait," he said slowly, carefully. "It's unusual, And it's not something we can handle in the clinic alone. The words hit her like a wave, sudden and cold, and she felt her hands clench involuntarily, pressing into the edge of the examination table. Her thoughts spiraled, questions racing through her mind faster than she could answer them. What did unusual mean? Was it dangerous? Was she in trouble? Could it be a mistake? Each question made her stomach twist and her chest tighten. The doctor tried to explain, but even his calm, professional tone couldn't erase the fear building inside her. He was careful, measured, yet urgency seeped through every word. The ordinary checkup she had expected had transformed into something she had never imagined. The nurse moved closer, speaking gently, her voice soft and reassuring. It's not your fault, and you're safe here. We just need to take the right steps. She nodded, trying to absorb the words, but they barely reached her mind, drowned out by the flood of confusion and disbelief. She wanted to understand, but every explanation only seemed to raise more questions. Her pulse raced, and she felt a shiver run down her spine, as if her body had realized what her mind was struggling to accept. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally, each second moving slower than the last. The doctor typed quickly on his tablet, making notes, sending messages, arranging the next steps. She watched every movement, trying to decipher what was happening, but the technical terms and professional actions were beyond her comprehension. She felt small, fragile, as if the world around her had shifted, leaving her floating in uncertainty. Every ordinary thing in the room, the soft hum of the machines, the sterile smell, the light from the window, suddenly felt foreign, almost unreal. Finally, the doctor turned to her with a firm but kind expression. I know this is confusing, and I know it's a lot to take in, but we need to act quickly, and I promise we will help you through this. She nodded silently, the fear and confusion still twisting inside her, but a small part of her clung to his words, searching for hope. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that despite the shock, someone was guiding her through the unknown. For a moment, she closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Fear, confusion, curiosity, and disbelief collided in her mind, forming a storm she had never experienced before. She realized that this ordinary visit, which she had expected to be simple and routine, had become a moment that would stay with her forever, a turning point. A story that began with calm but now had taken a dark, twisting path. Even as she sat there, trembling and unsure, she knew one thing clearly. Nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The world she had stepped into that morning, with sunny streets and quiet shops, had shifted into something entirely unpredictable, something that demanded her attention, courage, and understanding. And in that small, bright clinic room, surrounded by professionals who carried the weight of responsibility, she realized that life could change in an instant, and she was standing at the very beginning of one of those life-altering moments. The room felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on her. The girl sat on the examination table, her hands twisting nervously in her lap, while the doctor and nurse exchanged a few quick, quiet words behind the screen. She could not hear exactly what they were saying, but she felt the shift immediately, the sudden weight of something serious settling over her. Her stomach churned, her mind racing, every thought louder than the next. She wondered what could be so urgent that it required hushed conversations and careful planning. Then, without much warning, the doctor's expression hardened, and he reached for the phone. His movements were deliberate, calm, but there was a clear urgency in the way he held the device. She watched, frozen, as he dialed, listening to the muted click of buttons, the quiet murmurs as he spoke. His voice was steady, professional, yet every word carried a sense of gravity she could not ignore. Even though she couldn't hear everything, she knew, deep down, that this call was unlike any ordinary phone call. It was a call that would change everything, and she realized with a sinking feeling that her life had shifted into an entirely new, uncertain path. Her mind spun with questions, each one more frightening than the last. Who would the doctor call? What would happen next? Was she in danger? Could she fix it? The words, authorities, and urgent echoed in her mind, but she had no frame of reference, no clue what to expect. All she knew was that this was no longer a routine visit. This was something far larger, something she had never imagined. The nurse remained calm, her gentle presence a small anchor in the storm swirling inside the girl. She spoke softly, explaining that sometimes doctors are required to involve law enforcement when certain situations arise, that it was not meant to scare her, but to ensure safety and proper action. The girl nodded slowly, though the explanation did little to ease the knot of anxiety in her chest. Each moment stretched endlessly, the ticking of the clock on the wall marking time she wished she could pause. Minutes passed like hours, the doctor speaking quietly on the phone, his eyes occasionally flicking to her with a mixture of professionalism and concern. She felt like she was watching two worlds collide, the calm, familiar world she had entered that morning, and the tense, unpredictable reality she had now been thrust into. Her thoughts bounced between hope and fear, imagining the worst, while trying to believe that somehow everything would be okay. Finally, the call ended, and the doctor hung up the phone, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he turned to her, taking a deep breath, and explained that authorities would need to be involved immediately. He spoke with care, choosing his words deliberately, trying to balance honesty with reassurance. "They will need to ask you some questions," he said gently, "and it's important that you answer truthfully and calmly." The girl swallowed hard, nodding, her throat dry, her heart hammering. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown, unsure what awaited her below. Her mind raced ahead, imagining police officers entering the room, questioning her, taking notes, the uncertainty of what they might find, and how her life could be altered in a single afternoon. It was a feeling unlike anything she had experienced, a mixture of fear, confusion, and disbelief, that made her feel both small and exposed, yet oddly aware of the responsibility she now carried. The nurse offered her a comforting hand on her shoulder, and the girl took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. She realized she would have to face this head-on, that there was no turning back to the ordinary, sunny morning she had left behind. No amount of preparation could have readied her for this, yet she had no choice but to follow the path that had suddenly opened before her. As they waited for the authorities to arrive, the girl reflected on the ordinary routine she had taken for granted, the simple act of visiting a doctor, the small talk in the waiting room, the quiet hum of the clinic, and how suddenly, it had transformed into a situation beyond anything she had imagined. She felt a strange mixture of fear, anger, and awe, realizing that life could change in an instant, that the familiar could vanish in a heartbeat, leaving only uncertainty and the need to act with courage. When a knock finally came at the door, sharp and professional, she knew the moment had arrived. The authorities were here, and the next steps of her story were about to unfold, steps that would challenge her, test her resilience, and leave her facing truths she had never anticipated. In that tense, quiet clinic room, she realized that ordinary life was over, and a new, unpredictable chapter had begun, one that she could never forget. The sudden knock at the clinic door made her start, a sharp sound that echoed in the small room. Her stomach twisted, and her heart leapt. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was the moment her ordinary world had truly ended. The doctor opened the door with a quiet but firm authority, and two uniformed officers stepped inside. Their presence was both intimidating and strangely official, the crisp lines of their uniforms, the badges glinting under the fluorescent lights, the seriousness on their faces signaling that nothing about this visit was ordinary anymore. The girl sat frozen on the examination table, her hands gripping the sides of the gown, trying to appear calm. Though her chest heaved with nervous energy, she had imagined what it might feel like when authorities were involved, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier, and every small sound, the shuffle of papers, the hum of the machines, even her own shallow breaths, felt magnified. The officers introduced themselves politely but formally, asking for her name and verifying the details the doctor had provided. They spoke in measured tones, professional yet not unkind. Their presence was reassuring in a strange way, even as it reminded her that this situation was serious. The girl nodded, answering their questions quietly, trying to steady her voice, trying not to tremble. She could feel every eye in the room on her, studying her reactions, noting her hesitations, and she felt exposed in a way she had never felt before. The doctor explained the situation briefly, carefully, keeping it professional, but the girl noticed the subtle tension in his voice, the way he avoided certain words, the pauses that seemed to stretch longer than normal. She realized that what they were discussing was not something she could fully understand yet, but it was serious enough that police involvement was necessary. Her mind raced, imagining all the possible outcomes. each one more frightening than the last. One of the officers motioned for her to come closer, and she moved cautiously, each step feeling heavier than the last. She tried to focus on the floor, on the tiles beneath her feet, on anything ordinary that could anchor her, but the weight of the moment pressed down, threatening to pull her into panic. The officer asked her to explain what had happened during her visit, and she found herself recounting the morning in detail. From the streets she had walked, to the waiting room, to the ultrasound. Her voice shook at first, but gradually, as she spoke, a strange sense of control returned, like by speaking the truth, she could navigate this unfamiliar storm. The second officer took notes meticulously, jotting down every word, every pause, every glance, every subtle expression seemed to matter. The girl realized how much attention was being paid, how carefully every detail was being considered, and for a moment, the magnitude of the situation hit her fully. The ordinary world she had entered that morning, the quiet streets, the sunny sky, the calm clinic, felt miles away, replaced by a tense, scrutinized reality. Despite the fear, she noticed something else, a strange sense of professionalism and fairness. The officers were thorough, careful, patient, and their calmness, though intimidating, also offered a strange reassurance. They were not here to punish, they were here to investigate and understand. And that knowledge, small as it was, gave her a fragile sense of grounding. She realized that even in moments of uncertainty, there were people who knew exactly what to do, guiding her through what she could not yet navigate alone. The doctor remained nearby, offering explanations when needed, and watching her carefully, ensuring that she felt safe even as the authorities asked detailed questions. The nurse stayed close as well, a quiet presence that reminded her she was not completely alone. Together, they created a fragile safety net in the middle of a situation that was anything but ordinary. Hours seemed to pass in minutes as the officers asked questions, verified information, and documented everything meticulously. The girl answered each question as honestly as she could, feeling the tension ease slightly with each truthful word she spoke. Though she was scared, confused, and overwhelmed, she also felt a growing sense of clarity, realizing that telling the truth, cooperating, and staying calm was the only way forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the officers nodded to each other, exchanged a few quiet words, and prepared to take the next steps. The girl sat back on the examination table, exhausted and emotionally drained, her mind whirled with questions, fears, and a strange sense of anticipation. She had survived the first wave, faced the initial shock, and now she was standing at the edge of a new chapter in a story she could never have imagined, a chapter that would test her strength, resilience, and understanding of a world far more complex than the one she had known that ordinary morning. The room finally felt quieter after the authorities left to handle the next steps, but the girl's mind was anything but calm. The weight of everything that had just happened pressed down on her chest, making each breath feel heavier than the last. She sat on the examination table, staring at the floor, trying to process the whirlwind of events, the ultrasound, the doctor's sudden seriousness, the phone call, the arrival of the police, and the questions that had seemed endless. Her hands rested on her lap, trembling slightly, though she didn't notice at first. Her mind replayed every moment in sharp, vivid detail, each one hitting her with renewed intensity. She remembered the doctor's concerned expression, the way the nurse had held her shoulder gently, the officers taking notes with such careful attention, and she realized just how far her ordinary morning had drifted from normal. The fear and confusion that had gripped her during the visit were now settling into a deeper, heavier emotion, one that was hard to name, but impossible to ignore. She thought about the people she would have to tell, the explanations she might need to give, and the judgment she might face. Her chest tightened as she imagined friends, family, and even strangers trying to understand what had happened. Each possibility seemed heavier than the last, and she felt a wave of helplessness wash over her, as if the world had shifted without warning, leaving her standing alone in a reality she could barely comprehend. Tears threatened to fall, but she refused to let them, afraid that crying would make everything real in a way she wasn't ready for. Instead, she sat silently, trying to steady her racing thoughts, replaying the doctor's words in her mind. "We need to act quickly," he had said, and she could still feel the urgency in his tone, the seriousness that had made her chest tighten. She realized that what had begun as a routine visit had grown into something far beyond her understanding, and there was no turning back. The nurse stayed nearby, sensing her emotional turmoil, offering quiet reassurances, speaking in soft tones that cut through some of the fear, but could not erase it. The girl found herself clinging to those small comforts, the human gestures that reminded her she wasn't completely alone in this, that even in moments of chaos and uncertainty, someone was there to guide her. She thought about her own body, the images on the ultrasound, the shapes that had seemed mysterious and threatening, and the reality that her life had been viewed, studied, and documented by strangers in uniforms. She felt exposed in a way that made her stomach churn, realizing that her privacy, her normal life, had been pierced by a sequence of events she had no control over. The fear of the unknown mixed with a strange sense of vulnerability that she had never felt before. Yet, even amidst the panic and confusion, a tiny spark of understanding began to emerge. She realized that these people, the doctor, the nurse, the authorities, were acting with her safety in mind, that their actions, though shocking and frightening, were meant to protect, to ensure that the situation was handled properly. Slowly, she began to see that cooperation, honesty, and calmness were her tools in this unexpected storm, the only ways to regain a sense of control. She leaned back on the examination table, closing her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her thoughts, trying to breathe through the whirlwind of emotions that surged inside her, fear, confusion, helplessness, and even a faint curiosity about what would come next, all collided in a storm she had never experienced, but she realized she had survived the first, most intense wave, and that survival gave her a strange sense of strength. As she opened her eyes, the sunlight streaming faintly through the clinic window seemed different, sharper, more real. Her ordinary morning, the walk to the clinic, the quiet streets, the familiar sights, now felt like it belonged to someone else, someone untouched by the reality she now faced. She understood that her life had changed irrevocably, that this emotional fallout was not just about fear or confusion, but about stepping into a new reality, one that demanded resilience, courage, and understanding. For the first time since the ultrasound, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth, that she had survived something extraordinary, that she had faced the first wave of a life-altering event, and that her emotions, though intense and overwhelming, were a sign that she was processing, learning, and slowly preparing for what came next. She knew that the days ahead would be challenging, but also that she had begun to discover a quiet, unspoken strength within herself, a strength that would carry her through the uncertainty that still awaited. The days after the visit passed in a strange haze, each one carrying the weight of what had happened in that small clinic room. The girl found herself thinking constantly about the events, replaying them in her mind, each detail sharper and more vivid than she remembered, the doctor's serious expression, the ultrasound images, the phone call, the arrival of the police, and the questions that had been asked. All of it lingered like shadows she couldn't shake. She realized that life had shifted on its axis that morning, and nothing would ever feel ordinary again. At first, she felt a mixture of fear and anger, frustration at how quickly everything had changed. How could a routine checkup transform into something so intense, so life-altering? She thought about the ordinary streets she had walked that morning, the quiet shops, the sunlight on the pavement, and how distant it all seemed now. Her life had been ordinary and predictable, and in a single day, that predictability had vanished, replaced by uncertainty, responsibility, and new awareness. But gradually, amid the fear and confusion, she began to notice something else, something unexpected. Her mind started to sift through the chaos and recognize the care and professionalism that had guided her through each moment. The doctor had acted quickly and responsibly, the nurse had stayed close to support her, and the authorities had handled the situation with calm precision. Each of them had helped her navigate a world she had not been prepared for, and that realization brought a strange sense of relief, a feeling that even in extraordinary situations, there were people to guide and protect her. She thought about herself in a way she never had before, about her ability to stay calm, answer questions, and trust others despite the fear. She realized that she had grown stronger in ways she couldn't yet fully understand, that even in moments of confusion and vulnerability, she had discovered a resilience within herself that could carry her forward. Her hands, once trembling with nervousness, now rested more steadily in her lap as she reflected on her own inner strength. Looking back, she recognized the ordinary moments in a new light, the simple act of walking to the clinic, sitting in the waiting room, even the routine conversation with the receptionist. All of it now seemed like a prelude, a calm before the storm. she understood that life often hides lessons in the most ordinary moments, that a simple decision, a routine visit, could open the door to experiences that change one's perspective forever. She also reflected on trust and responsibility, realizing how much she depended on the adults around her, the professionals who had acted with care, expertise, and integrity. She understood that in life, sometimes situations arise that are beyond comprehension, but the actions of those around us, when guided by honesty, ethics, and compassion, can help navigate even the most unexpected storms. This awareness gave her a quiet sense of security, a knowledge that she was not alone in facing life's challenges. As the days passed, she allowed herself to feel the emotions she had pushed aside: fear, confusion, grief, and even relief. Each one had a place in her journey, and she recognized that processing them was part of her growth. The experience, as shocking and overwhelming as it had been, had taught her patience, awareness, and the importance of facing reality, even when it is frightening. Finally, she began to look ahead, imagining a future where she could carry the lessons of that day with her. She knew she would never forget the ultrasound, the doctor's call, the police, or the emotional whirlwind that had followed, but she also knew that she had survived, had learned, and had discovered an inner courage she didn't know existed. Her life, once ordinary and predictable, had been transformed into something more vivid, more aware, more conscious of the fragility and unpredictability of each day. And in that reflection, she found something powerful, the understanding that even in moments of fear and confusion, she could find strength, clarity, and awareness, that ordinary days, when touched by extraordinary events, could teach lessons about life, responsibility, and the resilience of the human spirit. And as she looked out the window at the world she once thought she knew, she realized that while life could change in an instant, she was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the wisdom and courage that only experience could bring.